Hi, everyone. My name is Samay Mishra. I am the host of If I Die Today, a new podcast. We are creating content and videos for an interview style format with extraordinary individuals, people who have achieved professionally, personally, and have a lot to share about their lives. The goal of the podcast is to inspire, to provide some intellectual conversation, to create a forum for people to delve into some of the intricacies and deeper questions that they may normally not be able to get into in their day-to-day lives, but would love and have so much game and advice to share. I'm just going to be a facilitator for these conversations, provide my own touch, and ask the questions that are kind of uniquely catered to these individuals. Looking forward to having a bunch of guests this year. My goal is to have about 10 episodes done by the end of the 2025, and I'm really looking forward to everyone viewing. Just a disclaimer, this is all separate from my work at my company and my professional work. All my opinions, takes, and perspective is completely separate, and that goes for my guests as well. Any professional work that they do at their jobs, companies, running startups, and so on, this is all separate from that work. And just a disclaimer moving forward. And yeah, really looking forward to having you guys tune in. Nice. We're live and going. So, hey, this is Samay, the host of If I Die Today, a new podcast that I've started. And my first guest is a close friend of mine, my cousin, my brother. I'll let him introduce himself and a little bit of his background. But today we have Sankalp Panigrahi. Hey, man, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me. Excited to be the inaugural guest of this podcast and super excited to see where you take things.
It's funny how, we live together, but we're hitting it online because I'm actually in a different state. So I'm glad, because if we were doing this in the same apartment building, it'd be a little bit more. I just walk to your room.
Yeah, no, it would be funny if we were just sitting across the hallway from each other in our own respective rooms, but we'll have to run it back for round two in a little in-person podcast
Yeah,
session.
yeah. So the theme for today is one of your quotes, something that you've developed this last year. Life is beautiful, and I'm blessed to be living it. And I kind of want to rock with that theme because I think that's something that's very reflective of the journey I think we both had for 2 to the last years. Um, and yeah, I think first off, I want to get a little bit more perspective on, you, who you are, give guests a little bit of more context on your background. Then from there, we'll kind of shift into some of the bigger questions. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little bit of an introduction, and I'll let you kind of give some context on your work, your background, where you're from, and all of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, like Sumay said, my name is Sankalp Panigrahi, but most people call me Sank. I am 25 years old, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, moved to DC for college, spent sort of 4 years there with an asterisk because COVID kind of made things interesting for a bit, and then moved to New York City straight after grad. I've been living here for about 3 years now, close to three and a half, and have spent the entire time working in finance. Like somebody said, I'm his cousin and roommate. I consider him my best friend. So obviously, this is a podcast that we've been talking about a lot, and so excited to kind of see it through fruition. And we'll dive a little bit more into my background and thoughts as we kind of go through the conversation.
Okay, nice. Um, yeah, so I think I want to dive a little bit deeper on, who you are as an individual, kind of what brought you into finance, of course, and just to give a little bit wider picture because, a lot of the viewers, I'm sure, will be from the Bay Area, and I think you understand very well that like it's one of those places in the world that's so big yet also consolidated into pockets, and depending on what pocket you're in, oftentimes determines the way you think, who you're around, what schools you go to, if you're worried about school, but also simultaneously in this melting pot of culture, tradition, hyphy, like all the things that we can describe the Bay Area as. So, kind of what's the first memory? Like, what's your first early memories of growing up? Like, what did childhood feel like for you? Um, and yeah, growing up, and originally you were in Foster City and then moved to San Ramon. Like, what were those early memories like for you growing up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you characterized it well in that the Bay Area is kind of this massive, very diverse area. Yet at the same time, it's a little bit of a bubble. I always sort of joke around that it took me leaving the Bay Area to actually realize that I'm a minority in this country because you kind of grow up around so many like Indians. It's just a predominantly Asian area. I actually do have a distinct first memory from childhood. It's not super meaningful, but it was like I was like 3 or 4 years old, sitting in our foster city house. I had this like pet or stuffed lamb that I would always play with. And I just distinctly remember sitting in this room playing with the lamb, and like my mom walks past the doorway. I've for years tried to find meaning behind like why is that the first memory that my brain can recollect, but I think it's just like when my brain decided to gain consciousness just while I was sitting there in that room. But it's
Yeah.
just my first vivid memory. I don't really think I'm sure like some therapists or psychologists could talk to like what it says about me, but I
Yeah.
haven't been able to reach a conclusion. It's funny. It's
They'll
funny how
be
the brain
like,
works that way, but
you really like goat
yeah,
curry, so that kind of
that's what it
resonated.
is. Yeah.
No, I have
But I
vivid
think
memories of
like,
that home too. I think not to
dude,
cut you sorry to cut you off, but like that specific home, like my earliest memories of us just running up and down the stairs. I remember you had like this electric piano and like all these random toys that we would just be playing with. So it's yeah, it's interesting that like at a certain point, like you live like from what 0 to you're born to like you go through elementary school, preschool, but like your actual first memory of like, oh, like this is what I like associate with my childhood is like, damn, like oh, I'm conscious.
yeah, 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 yeah. But it's interesting, and I love that house. I have so many amazing memories there. I lived there when I was from ages of 2 to 8 to 9 years old. So, formative childhood years were definitely in Foster City in that neighborhood, and it was I was a energetic and chaotic kid. I don't know if you remember from when I was young, I was always running around. I was one of those kids that my mom would be like, where is he? Because I'd just be at parks or on the street playing with the kids in the neighborhood. I was always a very social and extroverted kid. I think I still am a relatively social and extroverted person, but my parents' biggest source of heartache growing up was every time, they'd pick me up from school or we'd go to like, they'd have like parent teacher conferences or whatever. The number one piece of feedback was, your son is incredibly smart, but he just won't fucking stop talking during class. And so, I've been a yapper from day one. And I think that is actually somewhat emblematic of who I am as a person, just in terms of I gain a lot of energy speaking to other people. I gain a lot of energy meeting new people, hanging out with old friends. I think that's something that's sort of been a North Star for me in terms of the relationships that I cultivate, the relationships that I invest in. A lot of times in my life, I think it's sort of been happenstance in terms of these are just people I randomly meet and tend to find connections with and decide to invest more time and energy in. Recently, though, I've been putting a little bit more thought into how do I be intentional about it. And I think throughout the rest of this conversation, as we talk about how I think about, past, present, future, intentionality will definitely be a common theme that I bring up a lot. But
Hmm.
going back to kind of the initial, what is my North Star, kind of like early compass or early signs of who I am as a person growing up, I think that sort of social, extroverted aspect of me was definitely something that shined very early on from a young age.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and I'm obviously, like, we talk about that a lot. The scientific definition, I think we're also working with, like, extroversion for guests, so introversion, extroversion. The definition of, being extroverted versus introverted is not necessarily how you interact socially, but how you gain energy or don't gain energy from conversations. So someone who's introverted, may be able to operate pretty well in social situations, but not get energy from it, means it's like a draining act. They know that it's gonna be draining, as opposed to someone who's extroverted. When they're in these social situations, they actually gain energy. You feel uplifted. Um, and that's kind of the difference, I think. And I think we explain that difference really well in our own like when we're at parties, right? Like I think that we can both operate really well, but by the end of the party, you're raring to go, still ready to talk to new people. While I'm like, dude, I'm trying to go home. Um,
Yeah.
so no, I'm glad that you went into that, and that's an important part of your personality. I think that I'm glad that you recognized that when you were young, because that's one of your, I think, biggest skill sets, not just in like what you do, but who you are. So I guess that kind of brings me to my next question is like growing up, what did success feel like for you? Like what did it look like? Who around you did you feel like, damn, like this is success? Like I know growing up, we didn't have a lot of like Indian role models per se. Like when we were growing up, we didn't have a lot of people on TV. Nowadays, you see comedians, people who are actors, athletes, all who represent this Indian American kind of identity. But for us, we had to struggle with a lot of the duality of coming from an immigrant household, but growing up American. So there's always this like scale of like, am I American enough? Am I not Indian enough? So who we looked up to was, I think, like an important part of driving, like, who we wanted to be. Who were those definitions of success for you? What did success like look like to you when you were younger?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up several good points, and I'll talk about what success means to me. But I guess as a quick tangent to your point of like growing up Indian American in the early 2000s, we didn't see a ton of role models that were Indian Americans like us in terms of you see born and raised in India actors, Bollywood actors, politicians, businessmen, whoever, and it was like they looked like us, but they didn't talk like us. They didn't have the same experiences. Similarly, you looked at basketball players, businessmen, whoever, when we were kids, they had the same experiences as us. They talked like us, but they didn't look like us and they didn't have the same culture
Hmm.
as us. And so I think the Indian American Renaissance that we're seeing right now, to your point of seeing just more celebrities, politicians that are they see, as well as, basketball players. We're starting to see like college players come up. I think that's super exciting. I think it's great for kind of upcoming generations of Indian Americans. Going to the discussion topic of success, I think that is something that I have constantly grappled with growing up because I think there's one bucket where success was very linear in the sense of it is defined by sort of accomplishments, making the basketball team, winning a basketball game, doing well on a test, getting into college. These all were sort of very definitive definitions of success to where I could point to this is the outcome that happened. And because that
Yeah.
happened, I was successful. And I think growing up in the Bay Area where you just have all these kids who are grown or raised to be incredibly ambitious, it sort of forced me to kind of adopt that definition of success for better or for worse. But I do think at a young age, it did give me a series of goalposts to work towards as I kind of went through those key development years of my life. I will say, however, one of the core lessons that my parents had reinforced with me growing up and something that's stuck to me this day was, and I'm going to misquote it, but paraphrasing effectively was the idea that it doesn't really matter how much money you make or the accolades that you collect. Your success in life is defined by how good of a person you are. And
Mm,
I think as I've continued down this chase and journey of accolades and career progression, et cetera, there's always sort of been that North Star in the back of my head of, I can try to go and accomplish all these things, but as I do it, am I being a good person? I'm not perfect at it. I'm not going to say that I'm the best person to have ever lived, but I think
right,
that is
right.
just a lesson that has really been instilled in me. And at times I struggle with that balance, trying to figure out, how can I be a good person while still kind of meeting success and effectively the societally defined definition of it. But
Hmm.
um, I try to see success in both lenses whenever possible.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think that 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 message of like it's kind of like a good job that our parents and our I think our community, our wider community has done is like, how can you be a good person? And I think like even our coaches, like when we were growing up and playing sports, like you'd always get that like obviously you want to win and like that's the most important thing, but it was never the most important thing. They would always reiterate like, look, like win or lose, it's not about that. It's about how you play the game. And like, that message is actually so much deeper and profound when you look back at it because, you know, in life there's plenty of avenues and games and you get to pick which one that you play. But oftentimes like it's about picking, the game, playing it by the rules. But more than that is playing it so that people want you to come back and play again and again. And like
Yep.
that's the bigger I think moral dilemma that we have, like, I think pursuing the difficult things in life is like you'll always run into this two-way door. But that North Star of like, my dad phrased a similar thing in a similar way. He was always like, whatever you do in life, just make sure that you can have a good night's of sleep. And like, I think that was obviously like a moral compass of like, whatever you're doing, just make sure that you can sleep well at night. And if you can't, then you kind of know consciously and unconsciously, like, this isn't it. And
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised on how often that door is presented to you as you move up the ladder or as you deal with different circumstances and different people in the business place and life. So, I think that really resonates, I think, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of other people. So I guess that kind of brings me back to that was a little bit of your childhood, but obviously you hit a lot of these successful goalposts, right? Like as you were going through these stages, there was times I'm sure that you had failed in points, but you were also progressively making this track upwards. What were you chasing at each of these stages? Like when you were I'm sure when we were in school, it was just like, look, I need to do the method, right? I just need to get a good grade so that I can go to a good school. Ideally, you go to a good school and you get a good job after the fact. But what was like the internal, like, there's a lot of people who have those lessons and still may not do well in that. What was the thing that you were chasing? What was the internal, like, I need to do this, or the drive that kept you going throughout each of those stages?
Yeah. I think I'm going to respond to that in somewhat abstract terms. And I will sort of break up my life so far into three different parts. Early childhood. I think what I was chasing there was just, acceptance and belonging, whether it was on the playground during recess or within my own family or just anywhere else. I was really just trying to do whatever it took to feel accepted by my parents,
Mhm,
accepted by my peers. Candidly, I just wanted people to like me. And I think
mhm,
bit me in the ass a little bit. It turned me into a bit of a people pleaser. But I think at that age, I was sort of chasing that sense of belonging in the broader community. And it probably stems from what I talked about earlier, my personality trait in terms of being someone who's very social and extroverted. I think at that time I really found value in those interactions and coming out of those interactions thinking, oh, I think that person likes me and wants to see me again. As I transitioned to sort of late high school and college, I was chasing credibility. I wanted
mhm,
people to believe in what I could accomplish. And I wanted to prove that I deserved a seat at the table. And I think that was sort of my North Star at the time. And that manifested in a lot of pushing towards these accomplishments, having tangible things that I could point to of like, here's what I've accomplished, here's what it says about me. Probably still falls under the bucket of acceptance and belonging, but I think in terms of having, you know, accreditation that say like, oh, you can do certain things. And
mhm,
as I now transition sort of into my second quarter of my life, I think what I'm now chasing is fulfillment. Have spent, 24, 25 years of my life sort of chasing that external validation from the sense of acceptance and credibility. And I think I've now sort of shifted that focus to chasing that internal fulfillment to where I'm waking up every day and I'm doing something that excites me. I'm doing something that feels like I'm doing real impact. I'm effectively looking for my ikigai, right? And we've talked about that concept a lot, you and I, and it's a relatively common concept. But I think that's sort of where my current journey is taking me in terms of chasing fulfillment.
I think that's right, and I think I've seen that shift in you over these, like, past few years specifically. It's like what you're doing is, already an accolade, but it's like, how does this make me feel? How do I want to feel? What do I have to do to feel this? And I think that that's just a sign of maturity and of us growing up and our brain also fully developing because, I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of our youth is that. A lot of our youth is, how do I fit in socially? How do I be accepted by my peers? How do I garner the respect of my parents and the people around me? Especially when you're younger, you want to feel respected and you want to feel like, you're an important member of whatever is going on around you. And, if you're lucky, you have situations and support systems and community that, guide you in that direction. And I think oftentimes when we see children who don't get that, you get people who struggle to feel that shift to fulfillment. Like it always becomes an external validation game because people never get that growing up. And I think it's okay even if you don't get that. I speak from personal experience. Like when I was growing up, it was similar. Like I wanted to feel respected mainly. I would use that term respect more than accepted because it's
Mhm.
okay if I wasn't accepted into certain social circles or activities, but I wanted the same respect. A lot of people who were doing really well in that space, or like were the best on the basketball team, or were the smartest person in the class, or someone in the community who people wanted to ask about. Like for me, growing up with an older brother, it always felt like this need for like, people would come to me and ask about him. So that idea of like, I want people to ask about me was like really reflective of that like acceptance growing up. And then now, it's similar. It's like now you have this baseline level of like, I am who I am, but how do I reflect like what I'm doing into something that like I feel good about and I feel like I'm really content with this process that I'm in. And that's a constant battle. And I think that like you said, the term ikigai, for those of you who aren't familiar, ikigai is a concept, it's a Japanese concept that reflects almost like a Venn diagram of all the different aspects in life and your profession, essentially something that you're really good at, something that contributes to society, something that's better for the wider world, and a few others. And it's an intersection, and that's what you do. And that's why oftentimes in Japan, you see people do what they're doing. There's no retirement for them, whether they're craftsmen, salaryman, or whatever. They do this. Yeah, that's ikigai. And I think that's good to know as we kind of go through your journey. Now I want to go a
And
little bit more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say to that point, like you said, ikigai, I've always thought about it as like three concentric circles. Like you said, something you're good at, something that brings value to society, and then something that society will effectively compensate you for doing. And when you see someone who's found their ikigai, like when you see someone who's like in that groove, they are doing exactly what they're meant to be doing and they love doing it. It's an insane aura.
Hmm.
Nothing can stop them. They wake up every day. They're not stressed because they just love what they're doing. Any sort of roadblock is just a problem for them to solve. It's not like a hindrance to what they can achieve. It's not something that demotivates them. And so, you know, we're young, 24, 25. You're probably not going to find your ikigai immediately when you're young. I mean, you're blessed if you find it at a young age. But that sort of journey, I think, is exciting, trying to figure out each of those individual aspects and then seeing them all kind of come together. That's what the journey is all about. And so, yeah, ikigai is a great concept. There's a beautiful book written about it. I'll plug it to the listeners. I think it's just named Ikigai. Definitely quick read, but definitely recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, that's an excellent book. And I think when I first started like trying to figure out career things, and just trying to understand what I want to do, it really shifted my perspective because I think oftentimes people experiment and stumble upon a path, and it goes back to this like kind of intentionality conversation of like you need to define some of these things so that you can find that intersection, but it may not be immediate, right? I think you do have to try certain things and fail at certain things. And oftentimes when we see people who are in the upper echelon of success, it's they've found that thing, but they've also found it really young. They didn't have to go searching for it, and that's where you see like prodigies and so on. But yeah, excellent book. So you know, let me shift the conversation a little bit about this climb. For context, you went to Georgetown for school to study finance, and then after that, you joined Ares, a private equity firm, and then you are now at American Securities, another private equity firm. On this path, somewhere along the way, you stumbled into finance. Tell me a little bit about what that discovery period was like for you, if you had an inkling of that when you were in high school. Obviously, your dad is in that space. Tell us a little bit more about what got you there, and then kind of can get a little bit more context on you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you sort of nailed it on my head in terms of my background and how I got into finance. It was definitely something that I discovered in high school. I will say college really made me realize that this is something I wanted to pursue, but high school was really where I had that initial inkling. And a lot of it was my dad, seeing him day to day, the kind of stuff that he looks at, what he does in terms of talking to different people. I saw it as an interesting career where I could leverage these sort of relationship skills that I felt that I had while also being in something that was intellectually stimulating and constantly allowed me to learn. And I'd say I dabbled around a good amount in high school. I did a lot of speech and debate. I did, computer science. I knew that doctor was out of the question when I like first got my own like paper cut and decided blood made me queasy. I was like, probably shouldn't be a doctor. But I will say I dabbled around a little bit. And senior year of high school is probably when I really leaned in and was like, this is something that I want to do. Started investing a little bit on the side, just trying to understand how markets move. My dad was definitely super helpful there. And then it was Georgetown. I think that really just solidified it for me. Just having that community of like minded individuals who similarly were interested in learning about finance and pursuing careers there. I joined the investment fund on campus, which was just effectively 50 to 70 kids who hopped into a room a couple times a week and just discussed the markets. I met some of my best friends there. One of our roommates, Jack, was also in that
Mhm.
club with us. So it was really just kind of that constant positive reinforcement of going through those different activities, engagements that made me realize that, finance is what I want to do. And looking back in the past 3 years, being a junior employee in finance can be rough, but I've definitely noticed kind of that positive feedback loop where, despite the long hours, despite the difficult work sometimes, I do come out of it a lot of times thinking, oh, that was actually kind of interesting. I'm learning a lot. And this is something I want to continue to do. So, that was definitely, I think, the right choice. I won't say there weren't points where I questioned whether this was the right path.
That
And I
was
think
that
it's
was
something
gonna
I
be my
question.
next question is, did you ever doubt the path, and how did you, deal with that period of doubt?
Yeah, no, I doubt it. I doubted it constantly, and I still doubt it every now and then. I think it's hard because you'll never know for sure. I think my personal belief is if you don't look back on some decisions and wonder, what would have happened if I did it the other way, then you're not making hard decisions in life.
Mhm.
And all hard decisions will come with some level of regret. And that's just kind of life. I think some of the things that really I question a lot of is sort of the career ladder. You and I have had countless conversations. I remember last New Year's we were talking with an auntie and she was like, "Don't do the rat race. It's not worth it." Um, I had my one of my accounting professors my senior year, who was one of my favorite. Shout out Patricia Fairfield from Georgetown. She's now retired, but she was this financial statement analysis professor. We spent the entire semester just digging into different companies, talking about how to read, kind of tie the numbers in the financial statements to the overall narrative of the company. It was a fascinating class. I'm a bit of a finance nerd, so maybe not everyone finds it fascinating, but I distinctly remember the last class we had, she scrapped everything that we talked about and just talked about like impact. And one of the things that she said, and she was an incredibly accomplished person. She had worked at, Morgan Stanley and all these big firms in like relatively high positions before moving to the academic world. But one thing she said is that her biggest regret was not using her knowledge base and skill set to actually create some impact in the world. And she was particularly passionate about climate change. And so she
Mhm.
kind of went through that entire class talking about the climate change issue and how we could kind of go about and fix it. But it was a lesson that really stuck with me because there was no real textbook there, but it was a real like world lesson of almost her talking about her struggles with finding her ikigai, which I think was interesting. And so, I question a lot about, I like what I'm doing. I am creating impact, but is that the impact that I want to create? Um, should I take a risk in my life? I talk to you about this all the time in terms of I want to just take a risk in my life. And so to your point, there's constant questioning. In terms of what I do about it, I don't think you can ever find 100% solace in that. But I think going through the exercise of reflecting, of meditating, journaling, talking to people who love you, that I think is helpful in terms of just kind of getting the reassurance that, maybe you're not at the place that you're at that you want to be right now, but you're on the right path. And I think really where I find comfort when I'm at a point where I'm just questioning everything is just, we say this a lot, but just trusting the process, understanding that life is a journey and I'm
Mhm.
25 years old. I am not where I am going to be in another 25 years, and just trusting that every day when I wake up, the steps that I'm taking those days will help me kind of get to where I want to be. So that's kind of
Yeah.
where I try to come to terms with it.
That long-term orientation, I think, really shifts, like, how you look at the world, right? Like, I think it's important to understand the gravity of the day, but the only way you can understand the gravity of, like, when you're doing the mundane, of when you're doing the, like, "Damn, I don't wanna be doing this right now," or you go to that workout, or you eat right that one segment of the day that you want a sweet treat or something like that. That long-term orientation is, like, it provides significance to those terrible moments of, like, "Dude, like, what am I doing?" And that bigger picture is, like, I have a long-term oriented goal or at least a direction, and this is part of the progression. But I think also we've had a lot of guidance from, I think, just like older people in our life where, there's no accolade, there's no amount of money, there's no position or title or, any set moment where you just instantly feel like, "Oh, I've done everything. I feel good," and you get all the rewards of that. Like, those come in the minutia of the day. And, I think when you do that, you get a lot more significance into even the tougher times. But I guess that that kind of brings me to another question is like, can you recall a moment where you're in a crossroads and it's like, if I fail at this task or I fail at this project, this changes everything?
Yeah. There are small moments. I'll go on one of my like motivating factors when I go on like runs and stuff is like, if I don't hit 5 miles, that girl won't text me back. Like little things like that. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's something I try to do. The whole like motivating, like I need to kind of finish this task to achieve who I want to be in the future. I think in terms of the broad sort of existential crises of if I fail here, everything changes. It's often been a big career and life transitions. On the work side, when I first started American Securities last year, I had come out of a relatively non-traditional background in that I didn't do 2 years of investment banking before that. And so I almost felt like I was coming in with a chip on my shoulder where I had to prove myself that, despite not coming from a traditional background, I deserve to be here. So there was a little bit of, I really need to perform. And if I fail here, my life is going to change. Whether or not that was true is a separate conversation, but that's definitely a little bit of my mindset at the time. On a more personal level, the most recent and I guess powerful time I felt that emotion was honestly throughout my year of sobriety. So I guess for the listeners' context, I decided for the age of 24 to do a sober year. So from April 2024 to April 2025. No real motivation, honestly. It was sort of like I kicked it off as like a let's see if we can do it. And it just turned into
Mhm.
this beautiful life journey for that one year. And I think it was a constant like, this is hard, but it's going to be worth it. And if I fail right now, then I failed myself. And so
Mm.
that was sort of, especially in the rough days where I was kind of struggling with anxiety or like going to social events where it would have been nice to have a couple of drinks to kind of provide that social lubricant. I think really leaning into this is a goal that I've set for myself. And if I fail here, then everything changes. I think was definitely an emotion that I felt. I had a successful sober year. I think it went great. I broke it. And, now we've talked about it recently. I've gone back. It's been a turbulent return to sobriety, but I think it taught me a lot and it taught me kind of a beautiful aspect of life. I think those are sort of two main, just near term times where I really did feel that emotion.
No, I think that answers that question well. And I think it's tough to go through tough times without having some of those thoughts. Like, I think you need to struggle through certain things and see the other side to build that trust with yourself. Like, I can do hard things. And,
Mhm.
for the viewers' context, like I've also joined Sank on that sober year, and have kept it going for an extended period of time just because of all the benefits. But it was tough. Like, it's a tough thing to change how you look at things. And I think that's how I categorize a lot of that shift is like oftentimes it's not like obviously there's some physical effects, right? Like the anxiety comes back or when you're in those social situations, what do I do with my hands? Do I hold a drink? But the broader like pain point of doing things like that is how do I shift my mind to like, all right, before I used to rely on a crutch for certain things, or if I had a tough day, I would have a drink with my friends. How do I hang out with my friends who are having a drink? Or how do I deal with tough times? How do I categorize stress and how do I accept it and be like, oh yeah, like I'm stressed right now. What are the steps to dealing with that? And then you turn to things that, you do throughout your day, but you never see the intentionality behind it. Things like meditating, things like praying, things like going to the gym as a mechanism, not just for health, but for mental health. And those things become the buffer. And that's kind of the process orientation change, the perspective change. Like it's okay for me to feel certain things. And in fact, I haven't felt a lot of these things in a long time because I would either numb myself out or push it off and constrain it. And oftentimes like those things are you know, the alcohol or whatever else people do, it's like it's never this like the problem, right? The problem is
Yeah.
underneath. And you've said that a lot of times. The problem is actually all the internal things that you're dealing with that you need to find ways to not only articulate to yourself that this is something that I'm going through, but then creating measures of this is how we deal with these things. This is the precedent that we set.
Yeah, I mean,
But
the
cool.
substances are coping mechanism for that. And if you can lean into that a lot, then there's beautiful things that come out of it. And like to that point, going to those social events and like being sober and like what do I hold in my hand? I think a lot of times, especially in like high school and college, when I would like drink alcohol or smoke a joint or whatever, it would kind of lead it was related to sort of like wanting to feel like I belonged, wanting to kind of connect with my peers in this social event. And I think that year of sobriety taught me that I can do it. And there was a lot of beautiful things that came out of it. I think you and I sort of went through those struggles of like going to parties and going to clubs and being sober together. So it was nice to have sort of like a brother in arms there. But then it was also beautiful to see all of our friends who didn't join us on the sobriety journey, but also like supported us where,
Hmm.
people who didn't know us that well would buy us a round of shots and they go, no, 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 like Sank and Samay don't drink. Or, making us feel comfortable going to these cocktail hours or pre-games or whatever and just saying, grab a non-alcoholic beer, do a club soda, whatever. So a lot of beautiful things came out of it, especially my love for Topo Chico. I never would have discovered Topo Chico sparkling water if it weren't for that year of sobriety. Topo, if you're listening, Samay's podcast is looking for a sponsor, and we would happily take you.
Dude, Topo Chico Ranch Water. If you guys want to make money, I think we've collectively already given you like, months worth of revenue. So if you
I
want
have
to
one right
sponsor
here.
us, please. Um, okay. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit and kind of bring it more to your professional experience. And you're in a career right now where everything is meticulously measured on performance and it's a numbers game, like constantly looking at numbers, dealing with Excel sheets, and the theory behind it is kind of what you bring to the table and your intelligence behind these numbers. How do you deal with performing in a world where it's all numbers and these metrics often become defining factors for a lot of people? Do you use that as a performance measure? Do you try to separate the numbers from what you're doing and kind of give some insight onto how you operate in that environment?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point, especially in the realm of finance, where you can effectively track your performance very tangibly through numbers. And oftentimes it's very easy to tie your self-worth to that. And there's a ton of just horror stories about people who have gone through that and it's just ended poorly. And it can be hard to sort of separate yourself from that, but it's something that I've tried to work very intentionally on in terms of, it's very easily to internalize wins and losses as a reflection of your worth. But what I've
Mhm.
really tried to do is those wins and losses or just broader performance is really sort of just feedback, not my identity. And I think sort of separating that from each other has been super helpful and thinking about my identity as, what impact do I bring in the workplace? What do I create whenever I'm going through these different processes for deals that I'm working on? Or if I'm talking to someone at the firm, how do I impact them? What new ideas do I bring to the table? I've tried to separate the very quantitative definition of performance to a more abstract version where you can almost describe my performance from like a vibe and it can be hard for me to look at, my performance in a given day and say, how did I perform? Just given that there's no real tangible reflection of that. But I think it goes back to the point of sort of delayed gratification or laying down the stepping stones day by day, where if you focus on creating good impact, if you focus on working and living a life of integrity, those will eventually pay dividends in the long term. And so I've really tried to lean into the sort of long-term orientation of performance and success. I've been recently writing down sort of all my goals and who I want to be long term. And one of the things I write down is I want to get really good at the marshmallow test, which is effectively where you kind of put the marshmallow in front of a little kid and walk out of the room and you see sort of if they eat it or not. And I think trying to get good at giving up the short term, almost like dopamine hits for the long term
Mhm.
gratification is something that I've really, really been trying to do. And a lot of times, the quantitative definitions of performance and success in a field like finance can be very, very near term oriented. Granted, in private equity, not necessarily, which I think is helpful. If I worked kind of in public markets, it's a little bit more relevant there. But I've really been trying to shift my sense of self worth and just accomplishment to more of those sort of intangible, long term milestones as opposed to the near term quantitative and financial metrics.
That's awesome. And I think, yeah, writing those things down often gives it a life. I think we have these things in the back of our head, but when you write it down and at least set a timeline for it, you can look back and on the journey when even like those moments of doubt that we talked about and be like, oh, like this is the long term goal. Let's just focus on making progression. And that can be
Yeah.
1%, that could be 0.5% on the day to day.
Yeah, it tricks the brain too. I mean, to that point, like as I wake up every day and before I go to bed every night, as I, write down all my goals, I kind of do it in a way that, I am disciplined and dedicated to achieve my goals. Like I am someone who values delayed gratification. It does really trick your brain into believing those things. And I think, like you mentioned at the start of this podcast, like my mantra has always or recently has been, life is beautiful and I'm blessed to be living it. There are days where I wake up feeling like shit and life does not
Yeah.
seem beautiful. But I think
Right.
telling my brain that daily has like honestly had like a real long-term impact on the way I view my day to day. Cause like I think I've really internalized that whole, life is beautiful and within that beauty is the struggle. And
Yeah.
coming out of that beautiful struggle are, beautiful outcomes. And so, that long-term oriented view is really how I'm trying to live my life going forward.
That's awesome. So I think there's before I get into a little bit more of that internal why behind what you're doing, I do want to give an opportunity for you to you get a lot of calls from kids who are in high school or college trying to break into the space that you're in. And some of those calls I think you try to keep it extremely honest with them about how difficult it is to be in the role that you're in, but also how important and meticulous it is for you to love the things that you're doing. And, there are people in your space that I think really just love the money or they may just love the prestige of the position. But, to give viewers context, like Sank really lives, breathes, and dies finance. And I want you to first just give people a little bit of context on a little bit about your love for finance and how you think about things. And then I want you to, you know, give any advice to someone who's a viewer who's listening, who's maybe in high school or college, who wants these positions. What would be the biggest advice that you give these kids when they're trying to get into a space like this or when they're talking to you? What are the types of questions that you want to hear?
Yeah. So I think to your first point, my love from finance, I think just comes from my love of intellectual exploration. What I love about this field is just the opportunity to learn so many different things and speak to different experts in the field. Early on in this job, I hopped on the phone with a orthopedic surgeon and he walked me through all the different steps of knee surgery. And, I took that and I was like, okay, like how do I understand like the different products and different processes that are within the knee surgery kind of steps and how do I invest behind that? And like coming up with the sort of thesis, testing it, and like the research process is something that I've always enjoyed. One of the things that I've been chewing your ear off recently a lot about is the copper market, understanding what's going on in the world right now. And how do I understand these shifts in society and the market and the economy? And how do I invest behind that? I agree with you. I think a lot of people come into finance for the money. They come into the finance for the prestige. And a lot of times they burn out. I have a lot of people, friends from college, incredibly smart people who are great, great individuals, have nothing bad to say about them. But they went to investment banking because it was sort of the right thing to do coming out of an undergraduate business program. And they realized that this is not what they signed up for. The long hours, working on rearranging logos is the classic example of like kind of meaningless work that you do in investment banking. That's not the whole job, but there's a lot of times where you're spending late nights doing stuff that you just don't want to be doing. You have to sort of recognize that as just a necessary price to pay in order to progress in the field. But some people just don't want to pay that price, or they realize they look at their senior colleagues and they're like, I don't want to live the life that they live. And so I think in finance, especially, but really any sort of career, you really need to hone in on of, is this something that I want to wake up doing every day for my life? And it's hard. It's hard to answer that question when someone asks you it. Nowadays, investment banking recruiting for like starts incredibly early. I was interviewing as a sophomore in college. I had just finished my like introductory classes. Like I had no real understanding of the world, yet I had to go explain to a recruiter why I wanted to work in finance. And it's hard to do. And with just how widespread access to information is nowadays, you're starting to see preparation for careers bleed earlier and earlier on in kind of your stages of life, to the point where, I have a younger brother who's 6 years younger than me. And back when he was in high school, he's kind of gone down the computer science route, but he had a lot of friends that wanted to do finance. And I remember there was a couple of calls where I'd hop on the phone with these, juniors and seniors in high school, and they'd be like, I am super passionate about investment banking. And I was like, how? You're 17, 16, 17 years old. You don't know what an M&A process looks like. How are you passionate about investment banking? And like the candid answer is you're probably just passionate about the prestige and money that comes with it. And
Yeah.
so it's hard, but I think it's really important to try to understand what the day to day is and understand the things that you're thinking about when you go into different careers and what type of skills you build in each of these careers before you choose one, because you want to try to find a, a career or just any sort of direction in life that like builds upon your strengths, allows you to work on your weaknesses, and allows you, in my opinion, to operate just on the cusp of your comfort zone, like right outside of it, to where you're like mildly uncomfortable but not overwhelmed, to where you're constantly
Hmm.
forcing yourself to grow. And, I've talked to kids who, they definitely have that, where they're reading the Wall Street Journal every day, they're tracking the markets, they're coming up with these ideas on different trends in the world. And it's clear that, this is someone who likely will enjoy a career in finance. And then there are kids who've just kind of gone through the studying the technicals and like regurgitating news articles and stuff. And it's like, you are an incredibly intelligent individual. And candidly, your skill set is probably better utilized in a different industry. So
Hmm.
it's hard though, as a society, we ask people to figure this out very, very young. And a lot of times it ends up with people just being unhappy with the career that they chose because they sort of just went down what was seemingly the correct choice, but maybe it wasn't the correct choice for them.
Yeah. No, 100%. And you have some non-traditional advice sometimes for kids who are like in college and struggling to get that prestigious internship, or they're at a school where it's a lot harder to get those types of opportunities. I think you should voice that same advice to maybe the viewers if they are struggling in this, first of all, a terrible market for jobs. But if you
Mhm.
want, I think that you should give them a little bit of the piece of like, that non-traditional advice that I think that people don't hear a lot.
I think my number one piece of advice first to students in high school that are thinking about what to study in college is to just study something that you're interested in. Like study history if you like history, study English if you like English. If you're really passionate about computer science, go ahead and study computer science, but find something that aligns with your interests and will just teach you how to think. I think that's the best use of an education, is that, it teaches us how to think, how to take this. We live in a world where there's a crazy amount of stimulus constantly hitting us. There's so much noise out there in the world. How do you take that and actually comprehend it to actionable insights? I think is an incredibly rare skill, candidly, in today's world.
These
And,
days.
I have a lot of friends that work in finance and they study history or like art or whatever. And, they didn't need to study accounting and finance to break into this industry. And they sort of went the other route. I will say, if you want to be like a doctor or something, you should probably go to med school. If it's hard skills are required for the job, acquire those skills. Generally
Yeah.
speaking, if you don't know what you want to do, go study what you want to study. And I think a career will fall on your path. The second piece of advice that I give to a lot of my brother's friends now, not that they're all in college and kind of looking for internships early on in their college career, I think at some schools or just broadly, there's a lot of pressure to find kind of like the resume building internships of, you want to work in finance, you go work at a small investment bank or a wealth management firm or something like that. Or a lot of times you just end up doing admin work, plugging in data into Excel or buying coffee for the partners or whatever. My number one piece of advice for them has always been, go like build swimming pools for a summer. Go do some blue collar work. Go work at a wait like a as a waiter in a restaurant. I think those will give you real life skills that will be helpful in any career that you choose. I was a waiter at a senior home during high school, and senior citizens can be incredibly difficult to work with sometimes, but it taught me like, one, to always respect waiters whenever you're at restaurants, because half of the time, if your food is fucked up, it's not their fault. It's something happened in the back of the kitchen, but they're always getting the blame for it. But I think just customer service skills is like, people just don't have it. People don't know how to treat people with respect a lot of times. And I think it's
Mhm.
it's weird. And so I really try to like force young individuals to put yourself in a role where you're almost in a customer facing environment to where you're forced to honestly take shit from customers sometimes, and you kind of have to put on a good face and try to fix the problem, or go work blue collar where you are spending, 10 to 14 hours in like boiling hot sun in someone's backyard building out their swimming pool. Like that teaches you real hard work and how to go through that. And I think it's a skill that a lot of people just miss out on because they're constantly trying to just pad their resumes. And candidly, you put two candidates next to each other, there are chances that, someone who didn't go the traditional route of padding their resume and instead got these real life building skills ends up being the better employee than someone who looks good on paper. So that's sort of been my non traditional approach. My immigrant parents don't necessarily agree with that. So I get a lot of slack from them on it. But I really do think just like finding ways to develop these real life skills is probably the best way to approach development at a young age as you think about where you want to take your career.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I think we've gotten to get a good grasp of, who you are, how you become who you are, but I want to dive a little bit deeper onto your why. And I think it's tough to articulate these things, right? Because oftentimes we're just a byproduct of the people we're around, of our circumstances, and some of it may be luck, but I think we all have a little bit of an internal motor that keeps us going, keeps us waking up every day on the day to day, or at least in a pursuit of finding what it is. What's the toughest lesson you've learned about yourself since leaving college and becoming this adult?
I think one of the things that I've been struggling with a lot is realizing that I'm very bad with just like broader discipline and consistency. And obviously, I think as you're working towards long term goals that I've been talking about, having that discipline and consistency is a very key ingredient there. And I think a lot of that weakness of mine stems from just a broader lack of intentionality as I approach my life. I'd say I'm a relatively type B person, but maybe a little bit type B to the extreme, where a lot of
Hmm.
times it feels like life has just happened to me and I've just taken the choices that life just presented to me as opposed to being very intentional about where I want to go next and what steps I need to take to get there. And so one of the things I've really been working on is just being more intentional in my day to day. And it was hard because I think to your point, I've had these seemingly tangible signs of success. Like I have these accomplishments that I could point to that says, hey, I've done good things in my life. But as I look back on them, a lot of those weren't intentional decisions that I made for myself. When I was young, there was a lot of times my parents made those decisions in terms of different activities that I made. As I grew older, there was a lot of peer pressure from just other people are doing these things, so I have to do them as well. So one of the things that I've really struggled with since leaving college is that sort of intentionality of who do I want to be and what do I want to do? Because once you leave college, those clear goalposts sort of just drop. And that was hardest for me because I had always been, do well in high school, get into a good college, do well in college, get a good job. When I started my analyst position, get a good associate position. And now I'm here and it's like, am I just chasing goalposts or am I being intentional about how I want to live my life. And I realized that it's the former as opposed to the latter, which is where I want it to be as I sort of chase
Hmm.
this life of fulfillment. And so that was difficult. I think it was a little bit of a hard conversation with myself of, hey, Sankalp, like you are, strapped into this car with your hands tied behind your back and you're speeding down this highway and you're trying to steer with your knees, but like that's not an effective way of doing it. And so really trying to force that intentionality and thinking about what is my why. I don't know what my why is. And it's something that you and I have talked about a lot. I could say, I do things for my family. I definitely do. A lot of the things that I've done today in terms of trying to get into a good college, trying to get a good job was to make my family proud. But very quickly you realize that, your family's going to be proud of you and love you no matter what you do, like as long as you're doing something intentionally, it's something that's good for you. Obviously, if you're just sitting around like doing drugs all day, your parents aren't going to be proud of you. But like if you're doing something that like is helping you grow and you're doing it with real intention and passion, it doesn't matter what it is, right? From like a external view. So trying to shift that internal why is something that I've been really working on. And I think it's to your point, just something that kind of you discover as you go through the process and as you start setting your North Stars and you're kind of building your own goalposts to work towards, you start to define your why as you start to think about what am I like prioritizing when it comes to, emotions, impact, experiences. As you start to just, as I've started to at least journal down those different experiences, I'm starting to get kind of like an outline of a why, but really trying to dig into that intentionality and being able to just a little bit better define what that why is for me is sort of where that next step I think is for me in that path.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people our age feel that, right? Like, I think a lot of people, this is like a turning point. I think some people say quarter life crisis, but I think that is often a byproduct of not doing these activities beforehand. And you reach a point where it's almost like an existential dread of, what am I even doing? But to your point, it's like you can have your family, your friends, external pointers as a part of your why, but frankly, it's not strong enough. And when you're dealt with, the inevitable adversity that comes with life, and I'm not just talking about work, I'm talking about sickness, health, death, these things are real for a lot of people. Some people face them younger, some people later on, but these are inevitable within our life. And if you don't have something strong enough outside of the people around you or happiness per se, then when these tough times hit, then it's not enough to keep going. And like I think that's why it's such a difficult question to answer. One, because no one can answer it for you. And two, it's something that you have to really dive deep into figuring out. And it's okay if it's not right now, right? It's okay if it's not immediate and it takes time to develop. But when tough times hit, you want to be able to know why you're doing what you're doing, just so you can get up in the morning. And if you are someone who's in the slump of that, right, who wasn't even thinking about trying to move forward or upwards, like, and you're in a tough spot right now, and I think, we've both been through something similar of that, and that varies, but when you're in something like that, I would start with the why not, and I would start with the antithesis of that is, all right, we don't know what we want and what's enough to keep going, but we very clearly know what we don't want. And if you're in a tough spot, you don't want that. So you have to find a way to aim up. And if you can,
Hmm.
put your ego aside to, if you're trying to quit something or if you're trying to change the way you do things or get a better role or whatever the case is, you got to humble yourself down to set the goal a little bit. Like, you might look at like this, but you have to set it down to here to just like, today I'm going to make my bed. Today I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the gym. And I don't even need to work out. I just need to go to the gym. And these humble little steps of progression often lead to like, I don't want this life. And I for sure don't want this. And I explicitly write out like all the terrible things that come with if I continue doing this. And, that incremental progression often becomes exponential over time. But then you reach, I know I'm trusting people will get through this latency period. Once you get to this upper echelon of like, all right, now I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. I'm working towards something. But then you get to this, self-actualization page or, why and this why am I doing what I'm doing? Do I really feel good about it? Do I feel like I'm moving forward? I think a lot of people, even throughout their 40s, 50s, 60s, our parents, they all are battling with this, grappling with this question. So it's okay if you don't have to figure out, but I think that's why you need to be intentional about these things before it comes back to bite you when tough times hit or you reach these, milestones of life, whether that's quarter life, midlife, and so on. But
Yeah. I
um
think your point on the little steps is definitely super important. It's something that everyone talks about, right? You want to just take it day by day. Like go to the gym. It doesn't mean if you're gonna work out, but just show up at the gym. Doing those like baby steps, to your point, creates this kind of beautiful kind of exponential curve. And not to bring finance back into it, but we've talked about this. It's compounding, right? And
yeah,
you see it in like the numbers of like compound interest of you can earn 5% compounding interest. 5% of 100 is 5, but 5% of 105 is 5.3. So it's like you're incrementally getting better and better because your base on what you're starting off is higher than it was the prior day or the prior period. And so
right.
really understanding just how these small actions and these small steps can compound over time and really help you get to where you want to be. It's a powerful concept. And it just goes back to delayed gratification. It's hard because in today's society, I feel like it's so easy to get cheap forms of dopamine and not want to delay that sort of sense of satisfaction for a greater kind of accomplishment or a greater piece of success. But, you know, really leaning into that, putting your ego aside, putting aside the like discomfort that you're going to feel, I think it really, really does pay off. And it's a beautiful feeling once you sort of pass that latency period and you can kind of look back and say, oh shit, like I've grown a lot. I didn't notice it because I've been
Yeah.
so focused on the day to day. But looking
Mhm.
back a year ago, I was a completely different person than I am now. So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful concept if you can lean into it.
And latency is like, the toughest part. It's like, it's not off, getting started. Like a lot of people can get started and, people have to say that's the hardest part. But I think this latency period of where you're doing everything right that you're supposed to do, you may have seen like tiny improvements, but you just have to stick with it for an extended period of time. And that's when the chart really shifts. And that goes for, it's a universal concept that goes for money, that goes for habit compounding and so on. But if you can stay the course, and I think that's why people reiterate this time and time again. There's a reason people always say, trust the process, stay the course, not because, they want you to, keep failing. It's like this incremental progression. This is where people quit. This is where a majority of the people quit on their journeys. People quit on the gym, people quit on their diet, people quit on their career, quit on learning something, quit on their relationship. There's a latency period where you just have to struggle, do everything right and struggle and not get any of the results. But if you can see through the other side, something that keeps me going a lot of the time is like there's no upward limit to like how good life could be or how good you could be at something. It's really like you can imagine it, and like I think this is a difficult thing to like articulate, but you can imagine how good things could be or your ideal. But if you get past this latency period, you really can't imagine how good it could be,
Mhm.
and that should be motivating. And oftentimes it starts with just a humble step of starting. Um, so all that to say, um, I guess I want to bring it back to a little bit of tying everything together. Is like, what would your younger self admire most about you today?
Yeah. Um, I think you would admire all the leaps of faith that I took. There were a lot of decisions that I faced in my life where I could have gone with the easy route. I could have gone with the comfortable option or, the option of tried and true success. And I just almost immediately opted into the path less was a path less trodden or whatever. And
Mhm.
I think he would admire that. Because young Sankalp was definitely someone who maybe felt a little bit more comfortable in his comfort zone, but always looked up to someone who took risks. And at some point, that switch sort of flipped for me. And I think it was just as I got more opportunities to take risks and I passed on them and I regretted passing on them. At one point in high school, I decided I was going to live a life of no regrets. And I think that just forced me to just lean into stepping out of my comfort zone, making the hard choices, proving to myself that I can do hard things. And each of those times that I did the hard thing and proved it to myself, I feel like I sort of hit a stepwise function and my sense of self-worth. And so I think you would really just admire the inner dialogue, how I approach my life, the things that I've accomplished and how I've kind of took those lessons, all the mistakes I've made in the past and tried to grow from them. Um, he'd probably question how boring I've gotten, I'll be honest. He's like, dude, you got plants you take care of now? What do you mean you stopped drinking for a year? Um, but no, I think he honestly, I think he'd ask me if I'm happy. And
Mm.
young Sunkel was a dreamer. He had ambitious goals. He wanted to be a rock star. He was convinced he was going to be in the NBA. For a little bit, he wanted to be an astronaut until he learned about how far away from home you'd be for like extended periods of time. But he was a dreamer and he had such big goals set out for himself. And so honestly, I'm just trying to make him proud. And so
Mhm.
I hope he would admire sort of the steps that I've taken today. I think he would question the same things that I'm questioning in terms of, is this path for me? Is this the path to fulfillment that I'm constantly chasing? But I do think he would admire sort of everything that I've been able to build in my life so far that has gotten me to here today.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure he would. That's because I mainly knew that younger you, and I think what maturing is and growing is more often, the death of the all the different potential that you could be to choose one. And those things may find their way back in your life at a certain point, but I think maturing and growing up is, you could be all these different things when you're a kid, right? If you had any sort of decent support or community around you, anyone told you that you could be anything that you wanted. But growing up is choosing something and seeing it through. And of course, like all your other passions and interests may find their way in back on the path, but maturing is choosing a path despite not knowing whether or not it's the right one, but rocking with it. Um, and you're definitely a testament to that. So the theme of the podcast is life is beautiful and I'm blessed to be living it. That's kind of your saying, and has been your saying the past year or two. The theme of this podcast is if I died today. And I made it that specifically because I wanted it to be a little bit of, understanding individuals outside of just the realm of, what they do, who they are, but also, what they want to leave behind, what their legacy wants to be. Do people want to inspire? Do people want to live a life worth living? I think these are often the questions that we don't really get in our day to day, or we don't really get to. We may implore and feel, but we don't get to articulate. So, if you did die today, what story would you want people to tell about you, about your life, and about your truth?
Yeah. I'm going to separate I'm going to put professional in its own bucket because I don't think I want people to only talk about my profession. But I mean, candidly, I would love for them to say that he was a great investor. It would be cool if I made some good investments over my life. But I think I want to build something. I want, whether that's an investment firm or a company or something, I want to sort of come up with an idea and find some people that vibe with that idea and build it with them, work together to build something with them. So I think from a professional standpoint, I want to try to take that risk and build something for myself. I think really from a personal standpoint, when I want people to, after I've passed away and they're talking about Sankalp Panigrahi, the individual, I just want them to say that I made people feel heard. And it's something that I try to do a lot when I'm at parties or, day to day at the office. As someone who is a little bit more extroverted, slightly more loud spoken, I've never felt like it was hard for me to kind of get what I had to say into a conversation or kind of voice my opinion. But I think some people can feel a little bit overwhelmed in kind of large group gatherings or parties or whatever. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is encourage people to say what they have to say. I'm a yapper, but I've really been trying to be a better listener because I do think everyone has an incredible story to share and they all have very, very real and valuable insights to provide across realms of life. And I just want to be known as someone who made people feel valued and heard in every room that they were in with me because I've been in situations where it felt like I wasn't heard or it felt like I wasn't valued and it sucks. It's a shitty feeling. And maybe it goes back to sort of my desire to feel accepted slash belonging in a broader community to where I want to share that emotion with other people who I'm around. But I
Mm,
really, really do want to be defined by how I carried myself in all of the relationships that I took part in. So, you know, sometimes that meant letting someone speak when I really did not agree with them. And it was hard at first, but again, putting aside that ego and saying, hey, they have a valuable perspective to provide here. And it's taught me a lot. It's helped me grow and question my own beliefs. And
mhm.
so I think it's that, just the impact that I had on an individual. Maybe I fail in my career. Maybe I lose all my money and, I just kind of bum it for the rest of my life. That's totally fine with me. And I think it goes back to the lesson that my parents said. I don't really care too much about people talking about my net worth when I pass away or my accolades. I just want them to talk about, Sunkel tried his best to be a good person and, he was decently good at that.
Yeah, man. And I think, for those of you who don't know Sank, like if you're walking in New York City with this guy, there is a 10 out of 10 chance that you are going to get stopped and be like, hey, what's up? And you're going to look and be like, oh shit, am I getting robbed? And then it's just a crowd of people or people that someone that he knows. And you'll go into like a 15-minute tangent just talking to them, and he'll be like, "Yeah, man, like I knew that guy from my elementary water polo team." So
I don't know how to
when
swim, but yeah.
when I'm in those moments with you, I think that's reflective of a lot of letting people be heard. Also, being someone that makes people feel like they can come up to you. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely situations where I see someone that I may know and I'm like, wow, that building looks sick. But you're always receptive and open to engaging with these people and making them feel like, they're the star of the room. So, you do a lot more of that than you may know. So I'm giving you your flowers there.
Thank you, man. I
Um,
appreciate that. Genuinely means a lot.
is there something you still haven't forgiven yourself for or feel like you're still, you're trying to work through something that, you want to let yourself let go, but something you're still struggling with that if you had passed away today, you'd really regret not letting yourself, let go of it.
Yeah, I think I try to live my life with no regrets, but I'd be lying if I said I had zero. A lot of it ties back to what we just talked about me wanting to feel like I was someone who was a good person to everyone that I interact with. I think there was definitely people that I've hurt in the past, and it was oftentimes a function of just letting my emotions take control of me, or maybe even like feeling like I wanted to belong in like a broader group where I'd, maybe just say like something mean to someone else that I constantly regret. And whenever I had the opportunity to, I very openly apologized to those individual peoples and said, those that's not reflective of who I am now and who I want to be going forward. But there are definitely individuals who, I would love to grab a coffee with and just apologize for like things that I've done in the past. There are missed opportunities that I didn't take advantage of, you know, opportunities to further push myself out of my comfort zone and grow that I either was too scared to take advantage of or just was a little bit too risk averse at the time. But looking back, I wish I had taken that leap of faith. And then finally, I think I want to live a life where I am obviously intentional, incredibly present in what I am doing in terms of if I'm having a conversation with you, I am fully engaged in that conversation. If I'm reading a book, I'm fully reading that book. There are times where I just was not present in moments where I really wish I was present because, I came out of that conversation, maybe not with a strong enough relationship with someone that I wish I had a stronger relationship with or whatnot. And so I think those are sort of 3 buckets in terms of where I would think about where my regrets fall into. Thankfully, there's not a ton in each of those buckets, but there are definitely kind of like 2 or 3 big moments that I look back on and, wish I had handled it differently or taken a different path there.
No, well, I think that the beauty of being our age is like you get to address these things over a long period of time. And, even if some doors aren't, I feel like closed, like even if there's still no closure there, you have the opportunity to create that for yourself, whether with or without that person. And that's just by how you're living now. And that's something that like I've been coming to face with is like, there may be some things that in the past that I regret or, may have not done the right way or handled that relationship correctly. But if I don't get the opportunity to fix it face up, then I get to fix it facing forward. And that kind of ties into my last and next question. Um, what's in it for Sank in the next 5, 10 years or in the future? What are some bucket list items that you want to do, whether that's jumping off a plane, cliff diving, traveling, starting something? What is in it for you in the future? What are you looking forward to on the on the long term scale, on the short term scale? What are some of your future endeavors and things that, you want to voice out to the universe and kind of that you've been thinking about lately?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's been on my mind recently is just I want to take a risk and in my career. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, maybe even sooner, I'm going to figure out what that risk is. And I want to take that leap of faith. And so I'm excited about what that's going to look like. I would love to your point, take a break and travel the world, eat some good food, meet meet different people, honestly. Like I want to go travel the world and talk to a bunch of locals and understand how they live their life and share my viewpoints, understand their viewpoints. Cause I think building that sort of cosmopolitan view of the world is something that I would value in myself. And I think it's something that I would be able to leverage a lot going forward as I think about how do I want to sort of create impact in my life. Um, in terms of what I want to speak out into the universe, I hope I meet a beautiful and awesome woman sometime soon that I could kind of share the amazing, beautiful life that I live with. Um, voicing that out there. It's not like an immediate urgent thing that
No,
I need,
they
but
heard you.
if anyone's
They
looking,
heard
I'm joking. But yeah, I think really it's just I I have done I've spent the last 25 years of my life doing what is seemingly the right thing in search of external validation. This is obviously a very abstract answer for you, but I think in 5 years, I want to look back and say, I have now reoriented my value set to where I am chasing internal validation. And that I believe hopefully will come from taking that risk and trying to do something by myself, build something new where I can kind of leverage my skills and existing knowledge base to create real value in society and then continue to learn from there and find ways where I can continue to meet new people and build new relationships and have positive impacts on their life. Um, Really just honestly finding a way to wake up every day and do all the things that I talked about on this podcast so far. Build strong habits that, orient me more toward delayed gratification, create real impact on people, build something real in the world at the same time, continue to try to become more of a polymath and understand different parts of the world and just kind of build that kind of intellectual knowledge base that I have. And so I wish I had tangible answers for you. But the reality is, if I had the tangible answer, I would have gone and done it. So
Yeah.
as I sort of think through the next 3 to 5 years, I guess closing out my 20s, I really want to lean into this journey of introspection and being more intentional on my life. I don't know where that's going to take me, but I do know that it's likely going to be a path of ups and downs and a ton of turbulence, some success, some failures, but hopefully just this broader trend towards fulfillment.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned some of your shorter term goals to me, and I'll go ahead and voice them as a shout out for people. Lock into Sank's Substack, where he'll go over all the financial woes, all the things that he's interested in investing. Um, his portfolio is already filled with amazing theses, but I think in the Substack he'll go into a lot of these different principles and how he thinks about things. And I think anyone who's trying to get into investing on their own or critically thinking about these things and understanding how someone in the space thinks about it from ideological to actually putting the money in, I think will be really valuable for people who are just trying to understand the space. Also things like learning, his continuous learning for constantly reading books. Like this guy's always reading with fitness, introducing new things like yoga, weightlifting, running, trying to do things like run more races. And this is just because I know this guy like the back of my hand.
Yeah, no, Substack's a good call out. It's definitely something that's been on my mind. It's sort of been part of the journey of I read a lot, but I don't write. And so sort of like I'm filling the tub, but there needs to be a kind of outlet of stuff. And I think that just kind of helps you build better understanding. I also haven't written a long form essay since college. And so trying to like get back into the process of doing research and writing about it. The fitness stuff is definitely real. I've committed to trying to run the New York Marathon next year. I got to try to either win the lottery or find a charity to try to fundraise for, but definitely something that I want to kind of lean in on the fitness side of things. And, I set a goal for myself of 20 books this year. We are in November and I think I'm like 8 in. So I don't know if I'm going to hit 12 books over the next 2 months, but I think having that kind of outrageous goal has forced me to build a good collection of books that I want to read, and I've been doing a pretty good job there. So I actually appreciate those call outs. I don't think those are things that popped to my head immediately, but definitely kind of short term goals that I'm hoping to do that I think again are just short term manifestations of what my long term goals are for who I want to be.
Nice, man. Well, really appreciate you, coming on the podcast, being the first guest. This is going to be a fun one to run back outside, get a grasp of having to articulate myself and better asking questions and hearing all the updates that come from, the time in between. But thank you
Yeah,
for
dude.
being the first guest in the podcast. Thank you for giving these people some game. And I will link all his social media, his Substack, which is still yet to be produced, but that will also be linked in. You guys could find Sank in his LinkedIn as well. If you guys are any youth in the finance space who are trying to connect with him, or if you guys are an LP or an endowment who is looking to spend a lot of money and look to invest into sand mines or copper or India, please feel free to throw millions of dollars at him. And yeah, looking forward to having you back on the pod soon, hopefully.
Absolutely, dude. I mean, again, huge congratulations for kind of taking the first step with this first episode. Truly an honor that I was the guest for it. I'm really excited to see where this goes. I think you have been very, to my point, intentional about how you want to drive this podcast. You have a really great list of guests that are coming up, and so I'm really looking forward to tuning in on all their conversations. And as I thought about prepping for this interview, I think these are conversations that a lot of people don't have nowadays. And I think it's good that we're doing it in podcast form so that other people can kind of tune in. If I die today, hopefully I won't, but it's forced me to really be super introspective about my life. So, hey, thank you for the opportunity. Congratulations on the new podcast, and really looking forward to all the good content you're about to put out.
Yes, sir. All right, man. Well, I'll probably talk to you later tonight. So have a good one. And thank you to all the guests and our listeners, sponsors. Hit me. Topo Chico, hit me. Anyone who's interested in being a potential guest, please do message me. I'll leave my business email as well as my accounts. And looking forward to you guys tuning in next time. Thank you for listening to If I Died Today. Join us next time as we explore another journey, another life, and another reason to keep going. New episodes drop soon, so subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if today's conversation moved you, leave us a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate the message.